John's an engineer, which is why he was chosen to come to the bunker with his family. So he's able to build things, he's able to fix things, and that's been his job in this community, keeping a lot of those things going in the bunker. He also has taken it upon himself, which is a bit of a sacrifice, basically, because whenever you go out into the elements, even if you have a suit on, you're still getting pummeled with radiation. You're still getting a leakage of pollution into your lungs. But he goes out and he scavenges and he finds things that will help them back down in the bunker, that, to fix things. So whether it's, a spanner or, a pipe or whatever he can get, because there's debris spread everywhere, or from ships that roll in, literally from the disaster. So that's been his job up until now as we come into this movie. Roman is actually a goat when it comes to movies. One, he's a fantastic young actor. He's worked a bit, and his mother is a director. His father is a DP. So he spent a lot of time on film sets. So, and he's very, very talented, and he's a great kid. And he seemed to have a lot of the characteristics that fit well into a young Nathan, this curiosity, this courage, and this fire, but also this reflection that I think Nathan so often has. And just a watcher, he's seeing, he's learning, he's taking things in through osmosis. But once he was there, I loved this kid. I had such fun working with him, and it didn't take him long, I think, to feel comfortable with me and Morena and feel that he was safe, but also to learn that this is a different kind of movie, and a lot of this movie is about stamina and commitment and really diving into these scenes and bringing it. I guess that's why we have a movie, because we chose a family that did have great resilience and knew how important hope was, that despite the impossible odds at times, that fight for each other, that are there for each other. But I think, and by the way, and that's one of the things I love about this movie, is that message of hope. And no matter how bad things might seem, to just sometimes you just got to hold on. And I think that's part of what it was with them too, because at times it felt like maybe they had lost hope, or that hope was such a small glimmer. But sometimes it's just about hanging on, just about having a bit of faith that you will get through this, or that somehow, some way, things will brighten up, that there is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. Is just don't die. Just don't give up, John is not an expert or something. He's not a superhero, but he's a guy who has limitations, as do they. He's a guy who has blemishes, as do they. He's a guy who doesn't always get things right, that is reacting to the situation sometimes with as much fear as they are, or with as little of an idea of how to deal with the situation. And that's something that you can really relate to and identify with. So it's a different kind of story, a different kind of audience participation, I think, where they really feel like, I feel like John, Garrity, Allison, John, and Nathan, the family, they really are the audience in this movie. They aren't just watching them, but they're in there with them because they are so relatable. Sometimes you just got to dive in there and give it everything. And then at the end of the day, you crawl into bed, and then the next morning you get up and you start it all again. That is, in a very crude way, how you make is not just action movies, but survival movies, because survival movies as well, you're always at the edge, especially when you're an everyman, So you got to put yourself, not just in the scene itself, but before the scene starts, put yourself into that level of beaten upness, of exhaustion, of pain. And that's as exhausting as the acting itself, is the preparation for the 220 takes that you do in a day. where you're very ill and you know you've been shot, you've fallen off something, you're exhausted, you're coming down off of the adrenaline of a tsunami, you know, something like that, or an earthquake, buildings falling on top of you, and then it's we have, I think, over the years learned what we do well together, and then where he ventures off and where I venture off, and how we can complement each other in that. And not just the creativity of the performance, but even in the balancing each other on set in between shots. You know, when I know Ric's going to be there for me in a certain way, and when I know how to go over and, you know, make him feel better about whatever's going on. So there's, yeah, 4 movies is a long time, and they were 4 difficult movies. So we've been through a lot together, Ric and I, and he's a fantastic director, and yeah, I'm very proud of the movies we've made. I had such a phenomenal experience working with her. Just even becoming friends, because we spent so much time together in between watching the world fall apart, waiting for the next meteor shower. We would obviously learn a lot about each other, and we laughed so much. When we came to the second movie, we were well aware of what we were in for. And I go back to that, knowing the physicality, the emotionality of what lay ahead, that there was going to be a lot of running, screaming, crying, hugging, you know, and just to kind of get ready for that. But she's such a team player. She's a phenomenal actress. She has great stamina in terms of being able to get through these movies. I love shooting on location because typically when you're on location, there's a reason for it. It's normally, especially in a movie like this, because it's an interesting location. If you're shooting a post-apocalyptic film, then you're not gonna go into your normal park, you know, or to your normal cafe and sit and do a scene. So therefore, we went to some really interesting countryside and old decrepit Air Force bases in England that were just cinematically and visually, I thought, pretty stunning. And obviously, when you're on location, then it just allows everything to feel more real. You sit into something in a more truthful way. You react without the artifice that you might have to create yourself in your imagination when you're on green screen. And you have to deal with the elements. You have to deal with the messiness. Like, for instance, in Iceland, in the final scene, where, you know, when we're running up and down over, there were so many holes in that ground. It's pretty treacherous and exhausting. But that's how it should be. That's life. That is locations. I think in terms of themes, in terms of, you know, the idea about that we're stronger in numbers, we're stronger as a team. And the more that we stick together in these times, like if we look at the world now as we're coming out of COVID, which maybe in some ways this represents people coming out of COVID in a world that is way more tricky than it was a few years ago, with a lot more going on that we have to kind of shuffle through and fight through. That just the idea of that hope, hanging on to hope, being able to just to be able to cling on and to not deal with things in isolation, to come together as much as we can. And as John and Allison did in the first movie, seeing past, you know, their squabbles, all their issues with each other, that they realized in terms of the larger meaning of this world meant nothing. I hope that it has, you know, that's part of its legacy, and also perhaps in realizing that, you know, this world is maybe more vulnerable than we think it is, and that we have to take care of it. This is perhaps an insight into a view of another reality that we're lucky not to have had yet, and we're still, you know, have to put a lot of work in to make sure we avoid.
Allison is, I guess, much like myself, a no BSer. She really doesn't beat it around the bush. She's somebody that's fiercely protective of her family and really very driven to be a good person and a good member of the community. And, we never really deal with what she does for a living in the first film. I always assumed that she was, either a stay-at-home mom or teacher or something where she had a lot of time to be with her son, because I think that was very much important to her family. What happens with Clark hitting and them having to go and fight for their family and their survival brings them closer together, and they realize what's important in life. And where the film ends is they've survived, they're in this bunker. And where we pick up in Greenland too, it's obviously been very difficult. It's 5 years of living underground, and their relationship has grown. And they're doing their best under the circumstances, but you can tell that there's a lot of love there. So in this film, in Greenland 2, we have Roman, who plays Nathan, and he's, it's really funny to just go from what we imagined the first one to be, and then to suddenly have a teenager. So it's been really fun to adjust the relationship and sort of imagine and fill in the blanks of what's been happening the last 5 years with the family. I think we're dealing more actually with the reality of what it would have been like to be underground for 5 years, what it is to be a kid growing up, where most of the memories and things that you remember from childhood is actually in a bunker underground, and the problems that come with that. And, we have had this pandemic, right, to draw on. And I know that what happened with my kids during that time, and this, the way that people emotionally develop differently under the circumstances. So we were trying to borrow from that for this film. Really loved how strong Allison was, how she wasn't a damsel in distress, that she was fighting for her family and her survival and her kid. I think very interesting to see a very sort of quote unquote a normal family going through extraordinary circumstances in a way that a lot of people in the world go through and don't necessarily get highlighted. I think this film really illuminates the issues with what we are facing with global warming and immigration and starting over. And there's a lot of really interesting themes that I think are important and that audiences will connect with. He's really fun to work with. He's putting in a lot of effort in this, man. I look at him and I'm like, I don't know how you keep this going. He's a really kind person, and we had a great time in the first film. And it's funny how the relationship just kind of carried over after I saw him. I hadn't seen him in, I don't know, 5 years, probably 4 or 5 years. And he gave me this big bear hug, which is what he's really good at. And we just jumped right in, and I felt like I'd been married to him during that whole time, which is a little scary, but mostly good. I think when you create characters together, you kind of get back into the routine of it. It's sort of muscle memory a lot of times. We know who they are really well, and who they are together, and who they are as a family, and it just kind of flows from there. It's got to really keep track of the emotional arc of the story and be able to do these small, intimate moments and adjust to that. And then also these big, ginormous explosions and cars flipping and comets, crashing across the sky. So it's really, it's great. And he's very open to, he trusts me, I feel like, with the emotional, maintaining the emotional truth and what I think is authentic to the character. So we have a very complimentary relationship, I feel like. I think after all the craziness and the running and the emotional roller coaster ride, like to play a scene where all of that is inside you, but you're just speaking very simple words to each other, and all of the journey that you've been on together from the first film and the second film is with you. It was like one of my favorite moments to play. In the English Channel that's been dried up, and we've been traversing it and trying to get to France. But there are these crevices that have opened up in the ground that are thousands of feet deep, and we have to get across somehow. So people have created rope ladders, and then there's like a little jut island, and then metal ladders that have been strung together with rope that then takes us the rest of the journey. It's harrowing.
The first one, to me, was more about the whole family trying to survive and going to this bunker in Greenland, which is where we are now. And this film is about my parents trying to find somewhere I could have a proper life in, and kind of navigating the end of the world.
This film is very unique in the sense that it combines action with emotional drama. That's definitely something I haven't done a lot of. I did just shoot a very active and action-driven film last year that did have a very strong emotional connection as well to the story. So I do love these types of films because I think it gives you a little bit of everything, right? It gives you care about the characters, you care about the story, but then you're also really entertained by these massive happenings around them. But I've been lucky to be able to do all kinds of films, and just before this film, I shot a very small indie that was just all people sitting in a room talking to each other, and that was really nice. But then coming to this, I was like, okay, I'm gearing up, we're ready, let's do it.
I think she's the first person I meet in the story outside of the bunker. I think she's going through the same sort of troubles as well. She's got a dying parent. She's leaving her parents behind. And I feel like they kind of relate on that way. And they've both been brought up without having experienced much, or having kind of lost everything that was special to them. The second one drew me in because I liked the first one, but also because my character had a really interesting journey, and I really needed to work. I hadn't worked really since I did my mother's film with Keira Knightley and Matthew Good, and I'm not going to list the whole cast, but a while ago. And I really wanted to work, and it was great. It was a great project with some great actors and great director. So I think the first film did really well, and I think a lot of people, I think it was during COVID, and a lot of people kind of were interested in disaster movies and seeing what would, although COVID wasn't an apocalypse, seeing others kind of going through a more kind of dramatic version of your situation. I think the second film would draw people in because I think people really care about the family in the first film, and I think it's an entertaining movie. He's very good at telling a story. If anyone asks him something about an experience or something, he'll spend a good 10 minutes with you talking about it. He's great. He's very funny. He's very charming. He's a great actor. He's very supportive. In fact, they both are. They were both very supportive to me. I think halfway through the film, they both kind of gave me a kick up the arse and told me to do a bit better, which is really helpful to hear. I'm very honest with them. I feel like they care about me. I know they care about me. But yeah, they're very, very nice people. He runs a tight ship. He's very efficient, very quick. He's very good at kind of human instinctual nature. That kind of like, fight or flight sort of response. He's very good at kind of understanding that and kind of showing it on screen. I think he's very fascinated in that sort of human instinct. Very interested in humanity, but I think what I think he means by that is he's very interested in how humans respond to certain situations, how they care for one another, but also how they're kind of selfish in that sort of way. And so in this film, I feel like a lot of it was about how people care for one another in times when they really need to care for themselves, how people, step on one another when their life's on the line, and how people step on one another when it comes to, their kids or their kid.
The interesting thing about the Greenland universe and why I signed on to direct the first picture is it was never about a comet. It was about us. It was about what catastrophe, what disaster, what life or death situation comes our way and how do we handle it. The interesting thing about The first movie, it was pre-COVID. We never knew anything about an incoming pandemic. And then as the movie was being finished, we saw the world grasping a real situation of COVID and how humanity dealt with it. Did we turn against one another? Did we help one another? So Clark represents us, in my opinion, and it's why that I've loved the journey on making the second picture here, Greenland Migration.
I think my character's kind of the symbol of hope in the film, and the symbol of, like, I don't know, he's the thing my parents are trying to protect, and kind of, he's like hope that there'll be a future, I guess. And it's kind of surviving so that he can survive, I can survive. And yes, it is about survival. It's about, but it's not so about you surviving. It's more so about giving hope to a better future, kind of, you know, making the world better for future generations.
The first Greenland took you up to the event that is the extinction event of the world. Greenland Migration will show you what happened after. Where do we pick up the pieces with the Garrity family? How have they been living, relatable to when we were in our claustrophobic environments of living in a pandemic? How would that be underground, living in a society that hasn't seen the sun, hasn't been above ground for years? How do we deal with one another? And then what happens when that is put into a life or death situation again, and we suddenly have to do what every species since the beginning of time has had to do to survive, migrate. And that's what this movie's about.
This is my first kind of action movie, to be honest. And it's tough. It's tough to wake up every day and in every shot have the same energy, the same kind of, you know, sort of like I'm gonna die kind of thing, like days on end in every take. And it is hard doing that. And it's very challenging. It's much harder than doing 6 pages of dialogue, in my opinion. Just physically, and it's a lot of it is about stamina. It's more so kind of like a sport in a way, because it's about kind of consistency. A lot of it's on consistency, whereas if you're doing kind of a dramatic dialogue scene, you know, it's not about consistency so much, because you're allowed to kind of break away from what's on the page and kind of do your thing and have like a moment. But in action, it's about repeating the same thing.
The interesting thing that you get, I think, with me as a filmmaker is, at least I hope it's interesting, is that I don't take the device and use it as a plot. I use it as a motivation to grab emotion, to grab human behavior. And in this sense, Clark was this mighty hammer that was gonna hammer the earth and bring the end of times. And we find out that some have survived it in this movie. And not only that, but the hammer has wrapped itself around the earth to where Clark is now broken into millions of fragments that almost look like a ring going around Saturn. And we have our own ring now going around the earth. The only problem is this ring breaks off and it comes down and pelts us without mercy. And to me, it's the metaphor that how we live our lives. We are constantly living under the threat of different issues, different things. This has been since the beginning of time. We don't have woolly mammoths chasing us down. We have certain other things that are dangerous to us. So Clark, in a sense, is an engine that shows that not only are we worried about what comes out of the sky and kills us, but it's also about what it makes other human beings do. What happens when you shake the earth like a snow globe and it no longer looks the way that you thought it did before. These are all the things that we wanted to bring into Greenland Migration to show when the world is thrown upside down and you don't even know how the world is shaped anymore. How do you navigate it? How do you pick up the pieces when the rules have been completely destroyed and are now being rewritten in real time? Greenland Migration is the next chapter in the Garrity family. The first movie took you up to the extinction event. The second movie shows you what happened, the fallout. and how their survival will be tested greater than ever. And the passing of the torch, and what are we going to leave our next generations to come? What lessons do we give them in our own family or to people around us? That's what Greenland Migration's about. It's about our own survival of not just our generation, but what legacy we leave the world and how do we continue it from there. It was fun to change the topography in places of taking what we would know as today and theorizing how would it be evolved and changed by the events of Clark and being hit, and also what we did to ourselves, which is that we live in a very nuclear world now, and a lot of the nuclear that we deal with and their power is for the greater good. They run hospitals, there's nuclear power, there's all these things. Well, what happens when those safeguards are destroyed? When power and electricity can no longer keep those shields up and that radiation leaks and it carries in the winds. So we really tried to play with what would be the dangers that Clark brought and what could be man-made as well as human inflicted, upon ourselves. One of the things that we studied was how tsunamis are really created by major earthquakes under the sea, and a lot of times those earthquakes create massive fault cracks, fissures that open up in a way that send massive shock waves of water the way that it does in this movie, but also how it can remove water. And it's no different than some of our continents back before the last extinction event were more connected, and they are no longer, and things have shifted. So we wanted to play with the tectonic plates and show how Mother Nature will reinvent herself by the way that the Earth shifts in these tectonic plates. And it allowed us to create this great set piece of coming to the English Channel, which John Garrity has seen since a little boy, and watching it be something he's never thought he could even fathom, of being a dry lake bed. This is my fourth movie with Gerard Butler. What I like that Jerry brings to the table is he allows himself to be vulnerable in a way that makes him relatable to all of us. My own personal opinion is that we have been living in a world of characters that are 10 feet tall and bulletproof and are impervious to pain, and they don't have flaws. I grew up and still appreciate the movies of the 70s and even earlier that allowed our heroes to be flawed and allowed them to be vulnerable. And what you get with Jerry Butler is you get somebody that is fearless to show those sides of him and those sensitivities that make us feel he's like me. Like, he might be, a stronger, more heroic version of what I think I would be possible to do in the characters that he plays. But I feel like I understand who he is because I think he's a part of what I bring to the table. She is a truly authentic person at heart, at who she is, and that authenticity is brought into her roles. And she'll push buttons to get there and call bullshit where it needs to be said. And I like that. I like that she's looking for the same thing that I am, of raising the bar and saying, if you're trying to make a movie that is living in a very heightened reality, how do we bring still a grounded sense within it of who the characters are and how they would operate? And she's an absolute pleasure to work with, and fearless. Roman is an extraordinary talent. He's also an extraordinary young man who has this worldliness about him that really had an insight to what a young guy like him would be dealing with in a world where the rules were destroyed and the world shook up like a snow globe. And it was his interpretation of the character and what he wanted to bring to the table, and understanding struggles of parents when our parents don't think that our kids know, but the kids know everything. Trust me, they know everything. It was really fun to play that with Roman. And so Roman was a really cool spark to show this evolution of a family and a young man who used to be a young boy and his evolution. We wanted those sense of hope that hopefully humanity will not turn on itself and there will be pockets of beauty and how we treat one another, but not to forget that the true lesson of hope was what a mother and father said to their young boy when it was going to be the end of the world, is that nothing can take away our love for one another, and that's all that matters. And I hope that the second movie does that, that at the end of the day, no matter what we go through as human beings or society, or live in a cinematic experience like this, that it leaves us the thematic of hope that as long as we have one another and our love for one another, we can overcome anything.